Hi, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the Senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville, and someone who spends a lot of time on election legislation and election laws. Welcome to this week's edition of Kibbitzing with Kagan, brief conversations with people I find fascinating. My very special guest today is Whitney Quesenbery, the director and co-founder of the Center for Civic Design. Whitney, thank you for being with me today.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me and for all of your great legislation on elections.
You're sweet. Thank you. So I am dressed appropriately, even though you can't totally
Oh,
see it. I'm wearing my favorite vote t-shirt, and I made sure to have my very favorite button, which says vote or you have nobody to blame but yourself. So you, Whitney, and your organization help to make sure that elections run better, run more clearly, and all that. We're going to go deep into that. But before we start there, you have a background in theater and lighting design. And at Bryn Mawr, you studied English and theater. And as a theater nerd and stuff, I just have to start there a little bit. What brought you to theater? And then what brought you to elections?
well, actually, Bryn Mawr brought me to theater because they had a gym requirement, but you could work on the theater crew and get your gym requirement met.
Love
Uh,
that.
so I fell in love with lighting dance there and got a little internship when I got out of college, got a thing, thought this would be fun to do for a year and did it for a number of years, worked
Yep.
here and there. And loved the lighting because it's ephemeral, right? It is something that occurs, it's really only there in the performance. So you could be part of the performance without having to be on stage.
Interesting. I love that. So, the Center for Civic Design. I'm guessing most people who are watching or listening have never heard of it. So, why don't you talk about what you do, why you founded it, and why it's so important?
Well, in 2000, we had this election that everybody might remember.
We are gonna talk about that.
And in the all the discussions about it, my mother said, "Is this what you actually do for a living? Is help make things work better?" And I said, "Well, yes, basically." Um, And I started going to little talks and conferences and meetings about this and discovered that nobody was really talking about design. They were talking about politics, they were talking about voters, they were talking about all sorts of things. But this little gap was how do we take the policy and stand it up on its feet in a way that a voter can understand what they're doing and vote in a way that meets what they're, want to say.
Amen. So, we are going to go to the infamous butterfly ballot. So, hopefully, you can see this, and hopefully, my viewers can see this. So, this was infamous in 2000 and arguably is the reason why Al Gore lost the presidency. Tell viewers, and unfortunately, those who are listening on Apple are not going to be able to see it, but can you explain what we're looking at and why it was so atrocious?
Sure. We're looking at a ballot that, when you just look at the picture, looks like it's okay. It looks kind of like an open notebook with a row of circles down the center, which
Yes.
you voted by putting a little stylus into one of those holes and punching out a little thing called a Chad, which then was read by a card reader. These systems were designed to have all the names on one side, but in fact, they have names going down both sides of the columns, kind of zigzagging down from side to side.
Hmm.
And so the first hole, which is oddly numbered 3, also confusing, is for the first candidate. The second hole is for the guy on the other side of the page. And then you come back down, but the blocks of text where the candidates' names are large enough that they actually go, the top line is right at hole number 1 and the bottom line is at hole number 2, and the one that you would punch for that candidate is the one in the middle.
Yes.
This is all, and in fact, as you work through the ballot, you would keep turning your pages and you would do more and more of those things, and each time you turn the page, it would move over to another row on the punch card.
Hmm.
There's a kind of tragedy with this ballot besides the big national one, which is that the reason why it's called a butterfly ballot is it's on two sides and they flap like wings.
Yes.
reason why that existed was because the election director in this county said, I know we have a lot of seniors here, and that as you get older, your eyes begin to go. And so I will work on making the text as big as possible. But there were so many people running for president that it pushed it to two cards,
Hmm.
two sides of the card. So you have this situation where something that was designed to help voters actually tripped up voters. And so people who were trying to vote for Al Gore at the Democratic Party ended up voting for Pat Buchanan in the Reform Party.
Yes. Horrible. So let's put that behind us now. I have stopped sharing that screen. That's got to be either the most egregious or certainly among the. What are some other challenges or disasters that you seek to fix?
Yeah, we actually worked on a project in 2008 called Better Ballots, where we teamed up with some lawyers and some political scientist people to look at at elections that were close and where there was something that went on that made everybody think maybe it might be design. So it might be two counties side by side that share a congressman, and one county had a lot of undervotes, people who didn't chose not to vote in that contest.
Hmm.
Um, and or some other sort of anomalous thing had happened in the data, and we started looking at the ballots themselves to say what might have gone wrong.
Hmm.
And it turns out that the single biggest thing you can do wrong is to split a contest across two columns or two pages, which takes us right back to the butterfly ballot.
Yes.
But it also might be because you have 35 candidates for senator,
Right.
and that's a lot of people to fit on a ballot. And so anything you can do to fix that is important. But also, it's really important to, if you know you have a ballot that might cause problems, it gives you a chance to do voter ed, to
Mm.
do outreach, to put signs up, to do education work to help mitigate that.
Hmm. So there's so many different ways people vote now. Is it easier or harder to vote by mail and have the ballot in front of you with 35 candidates, or to do it in person on an electronic voting machine? Is there a difference from your perspective?
Well, there's an advantage to voting by mail, which is that you have time to sit and think about the ballot. I mean, obviously, you could look at the candidate list, but there's nothing like having the real ballot in your hand.
Hmm.
So that's a good thing about that, especially if you're in one of those states that has ballot questions. And I know we're going to get around to that in Maryland.
Hmm.
But there's not actually a time difference between how long it takes someone to vote on paper or on a machine. We've done a number of, we haven't done some, we have actually done some studies that look at that. It was the first thing I did was some in Cook County where they'd bought new systems. They wanted
Cook
to know,
County, Illinois, Chicago.
Cook County, Chicago. They
Okay.
they were thinking about what kind of voter education did they need to do with their new systems. And as we were watching people vote both on the electronic machine and the paper, we started writing down how much time it was taking. And it turned out that people who are careful, mark, check, look, mark, check, look, do that on both, no matter how they're voting. And people
Hmm.
who are like tickety, tickety, tick, they do that on however they're voting. So
Uh-huh.
I think this really is voters' choice.
Fascinating. Um, there are a lot of things on the ballot, but user experience. Um, so voter display is one thing. Let's talk about voter education for a second. Um, do governments, you've worked in 41 states and the District of Columbia, do they look to you? Do they use the templates that you recommend? Do they have something that they've used in the past and they just check in with you for feedback? How does that tend to work?
Well, we think every project we do with an election office is really a research project. So it's
Mhm.
doing something maybe the first time for them, and then using that, excuse me, using that to be able to inform others. So some people come to us to actually do work. Some people come to us to have us just do a little consulting with them as they do the work.
Mhm.
And some of them just use our templates. And that's why we put them out there so that they're available. Often someone will say, I'm almost done. Could you just check my work?
Yes. Um, there are so many different types of voters. There
Mhm.
are, as you said, the tick, 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 and the very thorough researchers. There are also those who are more sophisticated, more educated. There are those for whom English is not their primary language. Let's talk about that first. Let's talk about language access. What do you think is reasonable in a very multilingual geographic area like Maryland, like Montgomery County, like my district in Gaithersburg and Rockville.
Well, we have the Voting Rights Act, at least for now, that says that if there 5% of the voters in a district that are in what they prefer to in governmentese as linguistically isolated households. In other words, they primarily speak another language. The
Mhm.
election office has to provide all material for them in that language. There are other places, California, many cities that go further, and the formulas differ from place to place. But often they say maybe it's a lower percentage and it's a smaller geographic area. So you might say if it's in one precinct,
Mhm.
and maybe we don't provide everything on the website in that language, but we provide basic voter ad and the ballot is translated. I think that translation is so important because look, we know that voting is a habit you develop, right? And some of us get that habit when we were children and being taken to the polls with our parents, but not everybody does.
Mhm.
And so if you can get someone to vote once, maybe get them to vote again, and you can build on that habit. So I think that having materials in your language is like a gateway drug, right? It opens that door enough for you to slip through and to begin to think you're fine. In one of my research projects, I talked to a woman who had started voting in her late 40s. And I asked her why she got started. She said, "Ah, I was a kid. I was kind of stupid and I didn't do it. But now I have a child." And that child was like, "What do you mean you don't vote, Mom?" And so I thought, I have to go do it. And I have a neighbor who is running for school board. So these two things got me together. And I said, "How was it?" And she said, "Well, I've done it 3 times now, and I think I'm getting the hang of it."
Aw.
She took it so seriously. She studied, but I think we have to it's easy to say, oh, it's easy, just go in and check a few boxes. But really, we're asking people to do something really important.
Mhm.
And they take that seriously. They may not behave the way we all behave in different ways, but I think people do really take that notion that they're being asked to weigh in on who will represent them and make decisions for them. And everything we do that makes it harder for them to do that is something we should fix.
Yes. Amen. Tell me your first voter experience. The first time you went to a voting place, and then the first time you cast your own ballot, if
First time I
those are
went to a
different.
polling place. My mother worked for the League of Women Voters in New York City when we
Nice.
had the big lever machines, and she had a little demo model of the lever machine. And I remember going in, and she let me go ka-chunk and pull the curtain.
Awesome. Uh-huh.
My first voting experience, I actually don't remember. I must have been in. It must have been when I was back in New York City, and I went in person, and it would have still been lever machines.
Okay. How do you deal with folks who say, I'm not going to vote, I don't care, or it's too hard, or I'm confused, or I'm too busy, or how do you deal with someone like that?
Well, I tell them it's their right not to vote just as much as it's their right to vote. Um, and then I say, tell me what makes you not think it's not worth it for you. We actually had a young man who said that. He said voting's not for me, but he agreed to look at the voter guides that we were testing, and he went through it, and he said, well, voting may not be for me, but it's important that everybody be able to make their choice. And I have a feeling that he learned a lot, and that he might go vote.
Fascinating. Okay. Um, how partisan is your work and should it be?
My work is totally nonpartisan and it should not be. We actually say we're not only nonpartisan, we're policy neutral. I mean, I might have my personal opinions, but when we work with an election office, they didn't get to choose those policies. Those policies came from the legislature or from the federal government or from their county, and they have to implement them faithfully and honestly. So we will be there to help them because I might not love the policy, but I still want to make sure, let's say it mandates a form. I still want to make sure that that form is not the reason someone can't vote.
Yes. Good. Biggest challenge you face?
Oh, biggest challenge we face. Just having enough time. Well, for one thing, we're a tiny organization, so we spread ourselves around. So we think the biggest challenge for a long time was getting people to think, yes, this is something that's important in election, and I think we're really there now. Um, the biggest challenge we face is how strapped election officials are. I mean, we have lost 25% of our experienced election officials in the last few years.
Yes.
There have been a lot of law changes. Every time there's a law change, you have to, fix the forms, fix the procedures, do the voter education, and um, everybody is really just scrambling all the time. So it's really a joy when an office is able to carve out some time and say, we know this is coming. We need you to work with us, and we can work with them in a sort of slow and careful way, but we're there for when it's fast and dirty.
Mm, amazing. Uh, Going back to you're scrupulously nonpartisan and policy neutral, where do you get your funding?
We get our funding in a number of ways. We have some private grants from foundations. We've had contracts with the federal government, with the EAC, for instance, the Election Assistance Commission.
On
Um,
which I serve.
yes.
Uh-huh.
So this is the federal agency that provides support and um, other things for election offices nationally. When we work with an election office, sometimes we're on contract, sometimes we're doing it using our funding. Um, and yeah, so it's a mix of contracts and grants. Sorry, that's the short answer.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. Just so anyone who wonders, yeah, but they're
Yeah.
getting all of them their money from the left or the right or the something. So,
No,
okay,
we get it from democracy, from good democracy groups. And in general, we have been lucky enough to have people say, we like the work you're doing. We want you to do more of us. Tell us the kind of work you'll do and make sure you share your results with us.
that's great. Transparency is part of what gives people faith in the elections. How transparent are most elections? We just passed another law that is being signed actually soon by the governor next week. And it requires not just that the State Board of Elections have their meetings live streamed and have all their meeting materials and minutes and everything on the website and maintained there, that our 24 counties
Mhm.
also live stream and have their agendas and meeting materials and stuff publicly available. Does that help with conspiracy theories and doubts, concerns?
I can't speak for conspiracy theorists because I'm not one, but I think that it always helps. I appreciate it because I live in Maryland, but I don't have time to go to the Board of Election meeting every time or even to my county meeting. But when something happens, I love that you can go back and watch it later. You see this in town meetings more and more as technology has become more available, and I think the fact that it's there when you want to, or in Maine when they do the ranked choice voting counting, it's published, it's out on the web. They record it, they keep it, and you can all be there to see them press the button and produce who won.
Right. So let's talk about RCV, ranked choice voting, which I have sponsored for a few years now. There are colleagues of mine and reporters, others, who think that it's too confusing to ask voters to rank by their preference. This candidate is my first choice, my second choice, my third choice. How have you found it in Maine and elsewhere where it's being used?
Um, I started out as a bit of a skeptic, but what we do to do our work is we talk to voters a lot, and we would say, "So read this material, tell us what you think it means." And someone says, "Well, I don't see why this doesn't make sense. If I send someone out to get me ice cream, I'll say I want chocolate, but if they don't want chocolate, I'd rather have butter pecan."
Right.
So the notion of choice and being able to say I have, if my first choice isn't available, seems actually pretty intuitive to voters.
Yes.
We don't see that they have a lot of trouble marking their ballot, although we have learned nationally as more and more jurisdictions are using it, how to design better for it and how to do better voter ed. So it's always important. I think the counting process feels a little complicated uh,
Yes.
with the how do what happens. And one of the things that we learned was that voters aren't really interested in what happens to the ballots. They want to know what's going to happen to their
Air
ballot.
ballot. That makes total sense to me.
Right. And so if I know that if I vote for somebody and they're still in the running and it's 8 rounds in,
Yes.
I stick with that person the whole time
Right.
until they're knocked out. And then they go to my next choice.
Right. Yeah, people get confused, and I think most of the YouTube videos make it harder to
Yeah.
understand. The
Well,
spoiled ballots and the cutting parts in half and moving things around. I think that's complicated.
it starts from the count. They're starting from the end. They're starting from how you count. With
Yes.
if you're doing policy, very, very important. But from a voter perspective, I want to know who I'm voting for, who my choices are. Then I
Mhm,
want to know how I mark my ballot to reflect my choices. And then I
mhm,
want to know in ranked choice voting how my choices will be how it will travel through that counting process. And then I want to know who won. And then maybe I want to know what happened in the sausage factory.
mhm, mhm. That's what we say, how sausage is made, how we pass bills and stuff, but it can be way confusing. Um, your website has everything from beginning to end of elections, from websites, preparation, poll workers, materials, and audits. Which parts, where do most election manager administrators mess up the most? Which one do you think that needs the most attention?
I think forms are always hard. Um, there are a lot of forms in elections, starting with voter registration forms and ballot forms and ballots themselves. And because they're the mechanism through which voters talk to an election office, and then everything else kind of spins out from that. So it's not just the form, but the explanations around the form, who when do you need it? Why do you need it? What does this question on it mean? And getting those into the simplest, plainest language really makes a big difference. We've certainly seen great progress in making election websites and election forms more accessible. We've seen great progress in more people doing language access. But I think it's always hard when you know all the words and you
Yeah.
know how it works from the inside to remember what it's like to look at it from the outside.
Amen. Which is why I love the idea that you're watching people
Yeah.
navigate it in real time
Yeah.
with just, yeah. Maryland enacted, after many years of trying, and I have to say I was a slow adopter, risk limiting audits. Can you explain in plain language what risk limiting audits are? And I'm guessing that you're a supporter and think it's good policy.
I'm a
But
supporter
can you explain it?
I'm supportive of audits in general. And I'm not an audit expert, but so that you're going to get the sort of middle ground from me, which
Perfect.
we know we want to double check elections, especially if they're close. I mean, you want to do things to make sure that you run the processes correctly, right? The closer the winners are, the more deeply you have to look into it, the more ballots you have to check to know whether you've done a proper audit.
Mm-hmm.
The risk limiting part is that there's a mathematical formula where you look at how close the winner is to the next runner up, and the closer it is, the more ballots you look at, and the further away it is. It doesn't tell you that you absolutely 100% to the nth decimal know that it was perfect, but it says we have now looked at enough ballots that we can decide that we have statistically investigated it. And the thing I like about it is, let's say it said you had to look at 100 ballots and you get to 100 and you're not seeing it, the formula would then say you need to do another 100,
Mm-hmm.
that if there's something that's not random enough or there's just something odd in the data, you continue doing it until you get to the point. Now, if they're too close and it's a very small election, you might end up just recounting all of the ballots,
Right.
but you don't do that. You don't do that unless you need to.
So, as you were talking, for some reason, and this has never come up to me, occurred to me before, I just came up with a sports analogy,
Huh?
not my first go-to. If you think about someone making a touchdown in football, and they're the only one on the field, they received a pass, ran 40 yards, and no one is nearby, and they break the pain and they get 6 points, and yay, no questions.
Mhm.
But if it's really close and the question is, did he get over the line? Was he down before he crossed and all this stuff? They're going to pause play and they're going to look at not just one replay, but they're going to look at like three or four different cameras and then make the call. So this feels, I don't know if that works for you, but that seems like a possible analogy.
Yeah, we audit all kinds of things. I mean, maybe you're the kind of person who goes to a restaurant and you actually check the bill really carefully, right? Maybe I'm not. But if enough people check it, then we all get the benefit of that assurance. So all the ballots get the benefit of having been part of the audit, whether they were the ones examined or not.
Yes, exactly. Let's talk about simplified ballot language, since you and I have been working on this for a number of years now, sadly. So in Maryland, you talked about voter drop off. You used a different term that I liked. Did you use a different term?
Mm.
So people who voted for governor, people who voted for, let's say, US Senate and Congress also, and by the time they come down and they have voted for their state senator, and they come down and there are just these long legalese gobbledygook questions that they don't understand. They tend to skip it because they don't want to vote wrong. And I'm putting air quotes here because they don't understand it, and so they don't want to mess it up. So there was a drop off. 400,000 people who voted for governor in 2022 did not vote in some of our ballot measures. And that's an enormous number. And so we're not hearing their opinions on issues like gambling, cannabis, abortion rights. These
Mhm.
are really important issues that affect them and their families, their neighborhoods. So why don't you talk a little bit about what we've been doing that 23 other states have already done?
So this is a movement to basically require that ballot questions, that questions that we put in front of voters, are written in language they can understand. Um, we took a different tack than some of the others. Instead of saying sixth grade reading level, we
Which is what passed the Senate last year.
last year, we took a new tack this year
Yep.
and said maybe the problem isn't reading level. Maybe it's that there's not a good explanation of what yes means and what no means,
Yep.
right? We have done testing with voters on explainers and on ballot questions. And one of the things that surprised me in it was that it wasn't that people didn't have an opinion. It's that they were really afraid that they didn't understand it. And they wanted to know, they did not want to vote in a way that would be against what they wanted. We had a question on the ballot this year in Maryland about abortion, and I have to say that I read it about 4 times because, I think how stupid I would feel as an expert in election if I'd gotten it wrong.
Right.
So this to me is one of the pieces of evidence that people really take their job as a voter seriously,
Yes.
and we owe it to them to take our job about talking to them seriously.
Yep. So, as you know, because you and I talked a number of times about this, and you were a wonderful witness when we had our bill hearings, we went through, my staff and I looked at the 23 other states, and we really cherry picked. And
Mhm.
every state's laws on this are a little different. Some limit the number of words, which we didn't like. Some went for the grade level, which we also decided not to do. We decided to say no redundancy, no passive language, no jargon. That, as you said, that it here's the implication. If you vote yes, here's what that means. If you vote no, here's what that means. It would also be the language would be available publicly. There could be a debate. There could be a lawsuit if needed to make sure that the language is plain English and understandable by the voters.
Yep. The other thing that's really important in it is that that the question be asked about the impact, not should we amend the Constitution, but do you want to allow or not allow gambling or abortion or whatever, that
Yep.
we speak to the outcome of the vote, not to what the lawmakers are going to have to do to make the will of the people real.
Yes. So once again this year, the Senate passed my bill
Mhm.
unanimously. And once again this year, inexplicably, my friends in the House let it die. I don't understand. And I do want to give a shout out to Governor Westmore because the governor laid down an executive order, and people who had never heard of executive orders before January 20th certainly know what executive orders now, since Donald Trump is doing a million of them each day. But last July, July of 2024, Governor Moore handed down an executive order saying that government should speak in plain English so that people can understand. And so we went to them and said, this is kind of the same thing. And so they endorsed this bill for the first time, which was great and very helpful. So we continue to work with them to see what appropriate next steps could be, because this is just common sense.
It is.
So any final thoughts on plain simplified ballot language, or should we move on to something else?
Well, we know that plain language works. The states that have had programs similar to the one that they're standing up in Maryland have seen real success in making their regulations clear.
Mm,
Licensing and industries type requirements, not casual reading here, but if you're someone who needs to know what kind of gloves you should be wearing to handle what kind of chemicals, you need to understand it.
yes, true. Uh, Storytelling is something you have written about. Can you give an example of the importance and the value of storytelling?
Oh my goodness. Uh, I think it's what we've been doing right here, which is thinking about who the audience is and what is the thing that will catch their imagination and interest them enough to listen to the next sentence, right? That might be a story about a person. And
Mhm.
so you get a practical example. It might just be not droning through your 10 bullet points, but actually thinking about um, how to make the point you're making clear and memorable.
Just a few more things and then we will start to wrap up, but I do have a lot more questions actually. Um, 2026, your great elections. What are your hopes and fears?
Um,
And I'm not talking about candidates or parties, just to be
but I
clear,
understand.
obviously. Yeah.
Look, we always hope that the election will go flawlessly. And there's a joke among election officials that one day we'd want a perfect election, and in 2020 they did. But because of everything else that was going on, nobody noticed
Hmm.
that they really rose to that challenge. So I always hope that I will be asked to be in one of those, resource rooms where you're ready to jump into action on election day if something goes wrong, and that we will be incredibly bored.
I love that. That's fun. So, assuming not bored, you have a magic wand, Whitney.
Mhm.
How would you use it? If you could change one thing in all election uh, um, offices, what would you change?
Wow. Goodness, there's so many places to start here. I think that I would do everything we could to make it easier for people to become to get registered, to be on the rolls. We do this in Maryland and in 25 other states, I think it is, where if you get as you get your driver's license, unless you say, no, I really don't want to be registered, you'll be what's called automatically registered. It's actually not automatic. It means that your name will automatically be put on a list for your local election office to register you. But we should be doing that at schools. We should be doing that at community colleges. We should be doing it at the exchanges. We should be everywhere where people are interacting with government. We should
Mhm.
be taking that opportunity to invite them to become a voter.
I love that. Uh, Eric, the Electronic Registration Information Center. I am astonished by how partisan, bizarrely partisan, the concept of keeping our voter rolls accurate is. You're talking about voter registration. If they were perfect, this micro moment,
Right.
then someone dies, then someone moves, then someone becomes of
Right.
age. It's impossible to keep them updated. But by sharing information across state lines, when someone moves from Montana to Maryland, their registration should be canceled in Montana and moved, added, updated in Maryland. It's not that complicated. But Montana and Maryland have to be able to talk to each other. Talk about that, the interstate
Yep.
connections.
Is the electronic, no, the elections registration interstate compact. Um, States join, Eric. I think that's right.
I said electronic registration information center, but maybe I've got that wrong.
You're probably right. You're probably got it right.
Something like that. But that's what it is. It's sharing
Swapping
voter
data.
information, death information from death rolls, social security, all that.
The job of keeping your voter registration rolls is like doing dishes. You have to keep doing it, doing it, doing it, doing it, right? So what Eric does is it takes every member state's voter registration rolls, and they check it against death records, against postal records, they can also look if they have a driver's license number to connect it or other data to connect it. They can say, oh, I see that you've moved from Maryland to DC or from Maryland to, Pennsylvania for cities that are on the border. They don't do anything to that data. All they do is send the states a list that says these people maybe died. These people maybe moved within your state. This person might have moved into your state. And by the way, we noticed that this person moved out of your state because they were in Maryland and now they're in Montana. And the election officials can check that list carefully and use it to do their updates.
Not
It's
complicated. Why is
complicated.
it that all these Republican governors are somehow seeing the boogeyman and wanting to extricate themselves from participating in that? I
I
don't
have
get it.
no idea. I mean, some of them are states that actually helped found Eric.
Yep. Like Virginia. I think they were fairly early on, and
Yep.
Governor Glenn Youngkin had them remove themselves. I don't understand.
Oh,
Um,
it's a fantastic organization.
yeah. Uh, Disabled voters. Is there a best practice? The blind voters have come into Annapolis with different ideas, not clear that it is secure. Some of the ideas they have proposed, and that's why we have not moved that legislation forward. NIST, which is in my district, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, the coolest federal agency you've never heard of,
Mhm.
which is in the heart of my district. NIST says no, and therefore we say no. What do you say? Is there anything new that we should be looking at, hoping for, exploring, or allowing?
Well, one of the things that I think every state should do, Maryland already does, which is that if someone who has what we call a print disability, they're blind, they don't have full use of their hands, um,
Hmm.
they have reading challenges, they can get an electronic ballot.
Hmm.
Um, and anybody can get this in Maryland, which I think is the right way to do it as opposed to limiting it. You get that ballot delivered to you electronically. You can
Hmm.
mark it you can print it and mark it out by hand, or you could mark it on your machine. You print it out and send it back. This is not completely accessible because it still requires a printer and paper and stamps or envelopes anyway. But it is a long way in the right direction. Uh, I share some of the concerns about fully electronic. There's things we just haven't quite worked out about how to secure the ballot at each end.
Agreed.
But because we can't get to that final point, we have to do everything we can up until there and do it beautifully. Maryland is actually a leader in this. If you go vote in Maryland, you are asked, would you like to vote on the ballot marking device or on the paper ballot?
Yes.
Someone will show everybody who uses the ballot marking device, make sure you're set up and you're ready to go so there's no problems using it. It's a fully accessible machine.
Yes.
And, that seems to me to be best practice to have in-person voting at our vote centers on election day, to have a way to get that absentee ballot just like everyone else does, but you get it electronically
Hmm.
and then print and send it back, or print, package it up and take it to your vote center, because we know that a lot of people, both with and without disabilities, like to kind of appear in person. And
Hmm.
I think in California, 50% of the absentee ballots are actually dropped off at a vote center or on election day.
And we have drop-off boxes that are convenient in every neighborhood and or every precinct, every area,
Yep.
all over the county, not every precinct. Sorry, correcting myself on that. And then there's always vote from home at your own convenience with your trusted person reading you the ballot, and just as you trust them to help you with your finances or your medication, someone can be helpful in as you vote. Last question. Donald Trump and his executive orders and how he is wanting to change things with our voting system. What's the biggest danger?
Doing it fast is the biggest danger. This is elections are kind of a slow moving system. They're very carefully. We actually kind of like special elections because they're like a dress rehearsal for a new.
Mm,
They're a chance to try things out. But when you start to change things in multiple directions fast, this is when you break things.
yeah, goodness knows we are watching him break things. So, Whitney Quesenbery, it is time for Fast Five. Five
Okay.
quick questions, five quick answers. And we are going to start off where we began this conversation, which is theater. Give me a couple of your favorite Broadway musicals.
Ooh, favorite Broadway musicals. Oklahoma, definitely. Rent, love that. And I'm kind of more of a play person.
Okay, all right. Oklahoma's on my top 10 list for sure. Uh, Number two, what is the most adventurous thing you've ever done, and would you do it again?
Ooh, starting the CCD, and yes, I would. Starting
Okay,
design, starting the organization.
love
That
it.
was a leap of faith.
Question number three, if you could travel anywhere and neither money nor time were an object, where would you want to go?
Ooh, I love New Zealand. I'd love to be able to just have a time travel device and just go there for the weekend.
Have you been before? Nice.
North Island only. I'd like to go to South Island.
Nice. Okay. Question four. If you could meet or share a meal with any historical figure, whom would you choose?
Harriet Tubman.
Nice. Okay. And the last question.
I'm from
Oh, I'm
Cambridge,
sorry.
I'm from Cambridge, Maryland. We have to say Harriet Tubman,
There you go. Exactly.
but I would say it
Well,
anyway.
love it. Question number five, the question I ask all of my guests. Whitney Quesenbery, Center for Civic Design. What is your hidden secret superpower? What's a skill or talent you have, something most folks can't do?
Plain language.
That's a good one. I love it. Well, thank you so much for all you do. Thank you for taking the time to kibitz today, and I look forward to simplifying Maryland's ballot languages together soon.
Thanks. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Stay well. See you soon.